Deep in the remote mountains of Spain, there exists a parasite, spoken of in hushed tones by locals. A creature they call Las Plagas, the plague. Unlike any known species, these arthropod-like organisms belong to no recorded branch of science, a genus without classification, as if nature itself had forgotten where to place them. The Plaga's life cycle is as unsettling as the creature itself. Born from eggs that spill forth from the flesh of their hosts, they are consumed by animals who unknowingly become the next link in the chain. To outsiders, Las Plagas is a little more than a legend, a footnote in forgotten folklore. But to those who live where the mountains cast long shadows, the plague is no myth. It is alive, waiting, and it thrives in silence. They were not content to merely infest the body. Las Plagas sought dominion over the mind. Once anchored deep in the nervous system, the parasite could reach into thought itself, tugging at the strings of its host. In humans, this influence often manifested as violent mood swings, heightened aggression, and a willingness to obey commands without hesitation. These victims, known as ganados, became living extensions of the parasite's will. Yet the control was never flawless. Unless the brain was fatally damaged, or the parasite achieved complete dominance, remnants of the host's former self remained. Many infected continued their daily routines, tending fields, walking familiar paths, speaking in their old voices, though their eyes betrayed a subtle vacancy, a lurking obedience waiting to surface. Stranger still, the infected were drawn to one another, forming communities and hierarchies, as though the Plagas themselves craved order. By the dawn of the 21st century, all known Plagas trace their lineage back to two origins. One natural, buried in the caves and soil of Spain's mountains. The other artificial, a weaponized strain forged by human ambition. The latter breed fell into the hands of the fanatical paramilitary cult called Los Illuminados. To them, the parasite was not a plague but a gift, a tool of devotion and domination, shaped into a bioweapon that would carry the creed into the world. Long before modern history recorded their presence, the Plagas had already taken root in Spain's ancient soil. Some scholars whispered that their reign stretches back to the Bronze Age, where primitive tribes first fell under their sway. Ganados of that era were not peasants or farmers, but zealots, men and women who surrendered themselves to the parasite's will. Their devotion left its mark in paint and blood, etched into the walls of the wharf bee. There, in faded strokes, one finds crude depictions of sacrifice, human figures bound and broken, offered up as tribute to the creatures dwelling in the dark. But their fate met steel and fire. Count Gregorio Salazar, a nobleman of ruthless conviction, led a crusade against the Ganados. To him, they were heretics, poisoned by a plague that turned men into beasts and gods into false idols. His soldiers scoured the mountains, driving the infected into hiding, slaughtering entire villages in the name of purity. When the killing finally ceased, only remnants of the parasite remained. What survived was not destroyed, it was entombed. Beneath a great mound, deep caves became prisons for the last of the Plagas. A trench was carved into the valley, and the lake swelled against their barrier, cutting the cursed ground away from the village nearby. To guard the seal, a fortress was raised stone by stone, its walls towering like a warning. At its heart stood Salazar, who swore his bloodline to the duty of Castellan. From father to son, the title would pass, a lineage bound to one grim purpose: to ensure the Plagas never escaped this subterranean grave. At the edge of a new millennium, the silence that had cloaked the Plagas for centuries was broken. Osmond Sadler, a man whose bloodline traced back to the banished Ganados of a nearby island, stumbled upon the parasite's prison. But unlike the Castellans sworn to contain it, Sadler did not see a curse, he saw power. Cloaking himself in prophecy, he styled his return as destiny, proclaiming himself the prophet of a new order. With charisma and cunning, he founded a sect that would become infamous. Los Illuminados, the enlightened ones. To spread his gospel, Sattler needed allies. He found one in Ramon Salazar, the 8th Castellan. Ramon, frail in stature and tormented by guilt, bore the weight of his family's legacy. The Salazars who had entombed the Plagas centuries before. Sattler convinced him that this act of containment was not protection, but a sin, a betrayal of the Ganados that had once worshipped the parasite. Seeking redemption, Ramon opened the gates his ancestors had sealed, vowing to free what had been imprisoned beneath his land. The excavation began in secrecy. Sattler and Salazar oversaw the work, employing villagers to dig deep in the caverns where the air was thin and cold. What they uncovered were not bones nor fossils, but bodies. Plagas suspended in grotesque state to mummification, preserved for ages by the suffocating absence of oxygen. Yet death had never claimed them fully. The parasites lingered, dormant but alive, waiting for the warmth of a host. It began subtly, a cough among the workers, a fever spreading through the camp. Then came the madness, the obedience, the sudden unnatural strength. The spores, long buried in darkness, had found fertile ground in human flesh once more. What began as an excavation soon turned into an awakening. And under Sattler's watchful eyes, the plague of old Spain rose again. There exists another telling of how the Plagas returned to the world, a version steeped in rumor and contradiction, whispered even among the faithful of Los Iluminados. In this account, the parasites did not lie mummified in the caverns below, but instead slumbered inside vast, resinous tombs of amber. These amber monoliths, glimmering like molten gold trapped in stone, were said to have been relocated long ago to the very island where Sattler's ancestors had once been exiled. For centuries, they remained untouched, relics of an age where men still believed it could bind a curse in glass. It was here that Sattler's followers dug, prying open the earth to harvest the luminous treasures buried within. The discovery should have been a triumph, yet greed and clumsiness undid their caution. In their labor, a few of the hired workers shattered the amber, splitting it into jagged fragments. From within seeped life. Dormant parasites stirred to wakefulness after ages of confinement. Infection spread swiftly. The unlucky laborers transformed into vessels of the old plague. The survivors, horrified by what they had unleashed, were commanded to handle the remaining amber with reverence, as though carrying holy relics. Sattler himself declared the resin to be a divine cradle, the womb of his new empire. Every shard, every block was to be preserved and transported with care, for within each glimmering stone lay the promise of dominion, the rebirth of Las Plagas. Osmond Sandler himself became host to the parasite he so fervently championed. From then on, truth and madness blurred, whether by choice or necessity. Sattler's body was claimed by the very creature he claimed to command. Some whispered that the infection sharpened his vision. Others believed it fractured his mind. Accounts of his intentions diverge, painting two very different portraits of the man. On one telling, Sattler remained a cynic to the end. To him, Los Illuminados was a mask, a performance crafted to bind desperate villagers and the disillusioned nobles to his cause. The Plagas, in this version, were not sacred relics but instruments, biological weapons to be sold, wielded, and profited from. Profit or not, Sattler was little more than a merchant of misery, driven by power and wealth. Yet another narrative insists upon a darker devotion. As the sole surviving heir of a family tied to the cult's earliest form, Sattler was said to have embraced his birthright with fervor. He preached that the Plagas were not parasites at all, but divine messengers, beings to be revered, not exploited. Where skeptics saw science and affection, he saw faith and revelation. In this telling, Sattler's infection was not corruption, but ascension, the consummation of his role as prophet. Between these versions lies a chilling ambiguity. Was Sattler a calculating deceiver, or a true believer who surrendered himself willingly to the Plagas' embrace? Perhaps he was both. First a manipulator, then manipulated, until man and parasite were indistinguishable. As Saller's reign tightened and the cult's influence spread, plagas were no longer seen as mere instruments of control. They became raw materials for creation. Under the guidance of Saller's scientists and zealots, experimentation began in earnest, prying into the parasite's full potential. What they uncovered was both awe-inspiring and grotesque. When exposed to certain stimuli, the plagas revealed an uncanny ability to twist human physiology beyond natural limits. Hosts grew stronger, their frames towering when unnatural size, their wounds closing almost as quickly as they were inflicted. Bones thickened, flesh hardened, and limbs could regenerate, as though morality itself was being rewritten. These enhanced hosts became terrifying weapons, perfect soldiers to embody Saller's vision. But ambition did not stop at man alone. By fusing human hosts with animal traits through deliberate infection, the cult engineered hybrid abominations. From the shadows of ruined chapels and subterranean labs emerged the novistadors, insectoid predators that stalked their prey with chitinous wings. The verdugos, monstrous, semi-reptilian guardians, bred to serve as Sadler's executioners. And the hulking nightmare known only as U3, a failed fusion project whose grotesque form, nonetheless, testified to the cult's relentless pursuit of power. It was Dr. Luis Serra who uncovered the most vital truth about the parasite's life cycle. His studies revealed that while the juvenile and subadult plagas could be surgically excised from the host, the procedure proved fatal if an adult plaga had already rooted itself deep within the nervous system. At that stage, only a highly specialized method, radiation therapy, could purge the parasite without killing the host. His findings marked one of the few glimmers of hope against the otherwise unstoppable infection. By 2004, Sadler and the Los Iluminados were no longer content with quiet dominion over a Spanish village. Their ambitions had grown far bolder, nothing less than influence over the world itself. The plagas, once a hidden relic of history, were now a cornerstone of a plot that reached into the highest echelons of power. But secrecy is a fragile weapon. Dr. Luis Serra, disillusioned by the cult's cruelty, leaked word of the parasite's existence. His betrayal reached the ears of rival bioweapons manufacturer, known only as the Rival Company. Through them, the notorious paramilitary unit, HCF, dispatched one of the most ruthless operatives, Jack Krauser, a soldier with a past soaked in blood. Krauser's combat expertise made him invaluable to Sadler's plan. It was Krauser who orchestrated the abduction of Ashley Graham, daughter of the US president, striking during her return from the University of Massachusetts. Krauser's team snatched her away to Spain, where she became the centerpiece of Sadler's gambit. Using a syringe, they implanted a plaga egg into her body. The scheme was simple and terrifying. Once matured, the parasite would bend her will to Sadler's. When Ashley returned to the United States, she would carry not only the plaga within her veins, but Sadler's influence into the very heart of the American presidency. When most federal agents compromised or under suspicion, the mission fell to one man, Leon S. Kennedy, an agent of U.S. Stratcom. Alone without backup or reinforcements, he was dispatched to follow the trail into the mountains where the plagas slept for centuries. Sadler, ever calculating, sought to make Leon S. Kennedy more than just an enemy to be eliminated. He ordered the agent captured and injected with the plaga egg, envisioning Kennedy as yet another mole, a weaponized puppet who could one day serve as his eyes within the United States. Yet Kennedy's resilience proved far greater than the prophet had anticipated. Meanwhile, Luis stood at a crossroads. In his possession was a dominant plaga, the key to Sadler's control over the others. He wrestled with the decision of whether to entrust it to Kennedy, who might use it to end the cult, or to Ada Wong, whose true loyalties remained veiled. His hesitation cost him dearly, and his fate was sealed before he could choose a side. Elsewhere, alliances fractured. Jack Krauser and Ada Wong, both agents of the HCF, turned on one another. Though each claimed allegiance to their liaison, Dr. Albert Wesker. Ambition and mistrust drove them into open conflict. By dawn, the battlefield was littered with the fallen. Father Menendez, Ramon Salazar, Jack Krauser, and Luis Sierra, all dead. Their ambitions buried with them. At the heart of the cult's power, the Queen Plaga was destroyed, shattering Sadler's army of enthralled followers. The dream of Los Illuminados collapsed into fire and ruin. Sadler himself was slain, his grand design extinguished in the span of a single night. Yet even in defeat, treachery lingered. Ada Wong revealed her true hand at last. She seized the dominant Plaga sample from Sierra's legacy, a prize destined for Wesker. Though she aided Kennedy and Ashley Graham in escaping the island, she did so only as the island erupted in flames, purged by explosives to erase the cult's tainted legacy. By sunrise, Kennedy and Graham were free of the parasites that had bound them. The Plaga's resurgence was broken, their research reduced to ash. But the shadow of what had been discovered, the parasite's potential, the sample Ada carried, ensured that the plague's story was far from over. The fall of Sadler did not mark the end of Las Plagas. It marked their evolution. In the smoldering ruins of the Los Iluminados empire, the survivors and scavengers of that night carried the parasite's legacy into new and darker chapters. Ava Wong's loyalties proved more complex than even Albert Wesker anticipated. Under orders from her HCF superiors, she betrayed him, delivering only a subordinate Plaga sample, while secretly keeping the dominant strain for her true masters. Wesker, furious yet undeterred, salvaged what he could. From the corpse of Jack Krauser, he recovered fragments of a dominant Plaga, enough to fuel his next ambition. With Wesker's connections, Tricell, a rising pharmaceutical giant with its own shadowy agenda, was brought into the fold. The researchers bent the parasite to the knife of science, subjecting both samples to genetic manipulation. The results were new breeds of horror. Type 2 refined for mass infection, and Type 3, a more volatile strain that promised even greater strength and adaptability. Los Iluminados did not vanish either. Shattered, diminished but unbroken, the cult endured in secret. They carried the memory of Sadler's prophecy and kept the Plaga a sacrament. Years later, the persistence bore fruit when they allied with Glenn Arias, a trafficker of bioweapons and a man of vision, not unlike Sadler himself. From the remnants and their parasites, Arias fashioned the A-virus, blending the genes of Las Plagas into a new contagion that carried the same terrible promise: obedience, mutation, and control. The original Plagas were formidable, but they bore a flaw that time and chance could exploit: patience. For the parasite to claim a host, it first had to be introduced in egg form. Only after days of gestation will the Plaga mature, threading itself into the nervous system and tightening its grip upon the mind and flesh. In those fragile hours, hosts could resist, even find ways to remove the parasite before control became absolute. It was this very weakness that doomed Osmond Sadler's grand design. Tricell Inc. sought to eliminate that weakness. From the remains of the dominant Plaga and its subordinate counterpart, the scientists crafted Type 2, a genetically engineered parasite designed for efficiency. No longer would it require a slow, delicate incubation. Type 2 could be implanted directly into a host in its mature state, bypassing the vulnerable window of development. The transformation was near instantaneous, ensuring obedience before resistance could take root. Where the original Plagas demanded patience, Type 2 demanded none. Tricell's engineers stripped away the long gestation period, producing a parasite that matured before it ever touched the host. No longer an egg waiting to hatch, the Type 2 Plaga was force-fed whole, squirming and alive into the mouth of its victim. What followed was swift and horrifying. Within seconds, the parasite rooting itself deep in the nervous system, seizing body and mind alike. For Tricell, it was the perfect solution. Soldiers and civilians alike could be transformed on the spot, their wills crushed in moments, their bodies made vessels of violence. To the unaffected locals of Kijiju, these new thralls are known as Manjini, evil spirits, whispered of in fear. Outwardly, they could still mimic fragments of their former lives, walking familiar paths, carrying tools, even speaking. But beneath that facade, they were puppets, waiting for the parasite's command. Unlike their predecessors, who needed a host cooperation to achieve full dominance, the Type 2 spared no such grace. Resistance was impossible. Consent was irrelevant. One moment of ingestion was enough to erase identity and turn man into a weapon. The line between parasite and person disappearing in a heartbeat. Neighbors became killers, and friends became Manjini overnight. The arrival of Type 2 marked the death of trust itself. Type 3 represented Tricell's most ambitious gamble, the Las Plagas. Where Type 2 had been built for speed and obedience, Type 3 was designed for transformation. By implanting a subordinate plaga with the genetic code of a control strain, the company sought to fuse dominance and mutation into a single organism. The vision was simple: an obedient host whose body would be reshaped into a living weapon of terrifying power. On paper, the results were promising. In adult and adolescent males, the Type 3 achieved a staggering adherence rate of nearly 92%. Hosts bonded seamlessly with their parasite, their nervous systems overtaken. Their physiology twisted to accommodate new muscle mass and heightened resilience. The physical enhancements were dramatic: strength that shattered bone, speed that defied human limits, and regenerative capacity that bordered on the unnatural. Tricell, this was the closest they had come to perfecting the super soldier parasite, but the failures were as revealing as the successes. In women and children, the adherence rate fell to zero. Not a single female or juvenile subject survived the implantation process, whether due to genetic incompatibility, hormonal variants, or the parasite's own limitations. The effect was absolute. This flaw rendered Type 3 unreliable as a weapon of mass infection, crippling its potential for widespread use. Between 2005 and 2008, Tricell Inc. became the beating heart of plaga innovation. In their hidden facilities, scientists engineered and refined parasites into new forms. Type 2 streamlined for instant control, and Type 3 sculpted for brute strength. These strains represented the culmination of Sadler's forgotten cult, reshaped by corporate ambition into weapons for sale. But the dream was short-lived. In 2009, Tricell collapsed under scandal and fire, its leadership exposed and laboratories abandoned. Yet the plague did not vanish with them. Somewhere in the shadows, an unknown third-party developer carried on research, salvaging Tricell's work and driving it forward. In 2010, the results of the continuation surfaced, not in laboratories, but on the battlefield. The Eastern Slav Civil War became the proving ground. In that fractured land, both the national military and the insurgent Cossack rebels turned to the Plagas, deploying them not as only tools of terror, but as soldiers in their own right. Entire platoons were infected, transformed into obedient war beasts, their strength and durability twisting the balance of the conflict. Civilians caught between the lines spoke of men whose eyes glowed in unnatural light, and comrades who became executioners overnight. At the center of the regime's operation was Holograd, the capital. Beneath its presidential palace, the military constructed a hive-like cultivation chamber, where plagas were bred and preserved in grotesque clusters, parasite treated as a sacred stock. But dispassionate control proved fragile. In the chaos of the rebel offensive, the cultivation lab was destroyed. Its reserve of parasites scattered or annihilated. The war ended without victory for either side, but with scars that lingered. For the world, it was confirmation that the plagas had outlived both Sadler and Tricell. No longer bound to a single cult or corporation, they had become what Sadler once dreamed of: weapons without borders, spreading wherever desperation and ambition welcomed them.